face death or, what is that word? What is the word? Hey folks, welcome back to Crows Before Bros. This is a channel that I run with my bestie Lauren where we talk about the books that we're reading and how we're feeling about all sorts of different bookish things. It's been a minute since I did a solo video, largely because I had actually planned to do this video a month ago, and then the sun came out and like a plant, or perhaps a wee baby blade of grass. I was like, I need to be in the sun. So I spent a lot of time just standing in my backyard, just like having a great time. But I finished reading it and here we are. So let's do a quick reading check-in before we get into the meat of this. So in the last 2 months, I read a handful of books. I read If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, which wasn't what I expected it to be, but I still really enjoyed a lot. I also read Not Here to Be Liked by Michelle Quach and Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. For things that kind of flopped for me, I read The Shadows Between Us by Trisha Levenseller and Good Girl Complex by Elle Kennedy. Like in both of them, the characters and the story just really did not hit for me. For our main event, the meat of this video, the entree, if you would, I'm going to be talking about the chunky, juicy, fat monolith that is Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. And I'm going to do my best to keep this one pretty spoiler-free overall. There's so much plot in this book that I can't even really begin to dig into it because this book is super long. This book has been on my list for a long time. However, I've spent so many years playing this kind of numbers game of how many books can I read in a year that the idea of reading a book that was so thick really was off-putting to me. I really felt like I couldn't make the space and time to engage with such a big piece. Even if this book was split into 3 parts, I'd be like, yeah, great. But because it was so big on its own, I was like, well, it's not going to help me reach my numbers goals. But because this year I'm not focused on numbers, I'm not playing this number game, I can't tell you how many books I've read this year, I have a lot more mental space and just like grace for myself with reading the things that I want to read. And it allowed me to sit with this book for 5 weeks without feeling like a lot of guilt and shame about that, which is so wonderful. So The Priory of the Orange Tree is an adult fantasy written by Samantha Shannon. It comes in at a gargantuan 848 pages. In a book world that's so run by duologies and series, it feels a bit like a unicorn to come across this book that is so massive and is still like a standalone. She's since released a prequel, but they're 2 standalone books just set in the same world. If you are interested in huge scope stories, in political intrigue and interesting characters somehow crossing paths with each other, fantasy world building, dragons, and representation in fantasy, I think this is a book for you. I'd really encourage you to not be scared by the length of this book. That's what was holding me back, tied in with the fear of how much world building would exist in such a monstrous book. But I think it does a good job of staying interesting the whole time, even through all that world building. Usually I start with something of a plot synopsis of what we're getting into, but I feel like in this one it's hard to talk about the plot without talking about the characters, so I'm going to start there instead. The story is told in 3rd person and from 4 POVs. First we have Ede, who is a mage gifted with a forbidden magic as part of her association with the Priory of the Orange Tree. The Priory is an organization that exists to protect the world from worms, which are basically dragons, and then the big bad dragon, the Nameless One, who wreaked havoc on the world 1,000 years ago, and people live in fear of his return. Ede enters the palace, secretly a heathen to the religion of the land, to protect Queen Sabrin. Queen Sabrin is believed to be blessed with a bloodline that has a magic that will continue to hold back the Nameless One until the bloodline ends. Sabrin, however, is really unsure of her royal obligation to get married and produce an heir to keep this bloodline going. Ede's religion doesn't really believe in that story and doesn't necessarily believe in this blessed bloodline in the same way and has very different origins to the same story. However, she agrees on the off chance that it's true to protect Sabrin because that's going to be what protects the whole world. And so she lives her life knowing that she could be outed as a heathen and face death or exile for her beliefs. Our next character is Tane. She is a dragon rider who's been training for this honor her whole life. She lives in a different part of the world that believes that dragons are these sacred beings and that worms are kind of this tainted version of what was once a really powerful, beautiful creature. Pretty much the rest of the world believes that all dragons are evil. Dragons, worms, doesn't matter. But where Tane is from, they believe in the divinity of dragons. The book actually opens with Tane rescuing a stranger, which potentially risks a dangerous disease in an island nation and also could risk her losing her spot as a dragon rider. That rescued individual is brought to our next character, Nicholas. Nicholas is an exiled old alchemist who fell out of favor with Sabrin after promising to make her a potion of immortality and failing to do so. This potion would have allowed Sabrin to never need to have kids, but because he wasn't able to make it, Nicholas was exiled out to a whole other country. Harboring an unknown immigrant is a serious crime in this world because of the fear of this disease that is linked to the worms in the Nameless One. As a result, Nicholas is arrested and through a series of events ends up traveling the world with a gang of pirates continuing his search for immortality. The final main character we have is Loth. He is best friend to Sabrin. He's really close with Ede, and he is actually sent away at the beginning of the novel because there's fear that Sabrin will choose Loth as her life partner, which would then not allow for certain political connections to be made. Loth really, I don't think, has his own plot along the way, but he is something of the glue to hold all these different moving parts together. I feel like they all kind of cross paths with Loth along the way. All 5 of these characters, if we're counting Sabrin also, their lives intertwine in ways that you really could not predict at the beginning. It all feels like a big chess game, or if you're watching like a fantasy TV, they always have those intros that are like, you know, this person is moving from this kingdom to this kingdom, and this person's moving this way, and this, you know, it's very that, you know? It really feels like every move made in this book is consequential. It feels like everything is done and has domino effects and everyone's impacting everyone else, even from kingdoms away. And overall, I found it really interesting. I was invested in most of these characters with the exception of Nicholas, who at the beginning, I was like, yes, I love a grumpy, old, exiled, bitter man who has like a background of heartache and all this, but at the end of the day, he just kind of ended up being a bit of a scumbag, and I was like, oh, I wanted to like you a lot more than I did. Let's take a second though and talk about the women in this novel. The women in this novel is the definite highlight. Tane, Ede, and Sabrin are all wonderful characters on their own. They all have such interesting motivations and point of views, and they're so complex and so strong. As a reader, I really felt Sabrin's hesitation to her royal duties and also her feeling of obligation to the kingdom that she gets to rule. I feel Ede's attempt to balance who she truly is with who she needs to be to keep this kingdom in check. And I feel Tane's deep need to be successful with her life goals, even through extreme guilt and big failures that should knock her down. Ede offers a lot of really insightful advice through the book that I found really impactful for me. There's this quote that says, "In darkness we are naked, our truest selves. Night is when fear comes to us at its fullest, when we have no way to fight it. It will do everything it can to seep inside you. Sometimes it may succeed, but never think that you are the knight. All of these women are so ambitious, so powerful, they have so many dreams and fears, and they're just such good, well-rounded characters. This book really gives us a wide array of perspectives and ideas, and instead of asking us which perspective was right, it asks us, would it be better if there was a right answer? And as a reader, you come away thinking, no. A lot of these characters are confronted with maybe part of their religion is incorrect, or maybe part of how they're seeing the world has been wrong this whole time, and how do you, as a character and as a reader, reconcile those differences when they come up? We watch as characters learn that their worldview is skewed and watch them struggle with how to work that into their life going forward in such a beautiful and real way. I think this was my favorite part of the book. We learn that some people's mindsets are demonstrably false, and we allow those characters to wrestle with that and allow them to, instead of just being like, yeah, that makes sense, or just like, no, that's not, to really wrestle with that and try to change how they're seeing the world and change how they're interacting with things in a way that's so beautiful. And we also allow some things to sit unknown. We also have a world that allows for people of all skin colors and ethnicities and sexualities to be welcome and commonplace, and that's just so refreshing to read. I really got involved in the main relationship that develops in this book. It's so good, and I don't want to give it away, but chef's kiss, it's so good. I do love a sapphic romance, and I just feel like these characters felt so natural together, and naturally Samantha Shannon does this great job of putting them just close enough and then tearing them apart again that you're like yearning for it. Now, there are definitely some parts that begin to lose me, where there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of people, and I don't necessarily know what's going on, but I feel like the book does a good job of kind of picking you back up and being like, all right, let's go. Overall, I would rate Priory of the Orange Tree a 4.25 out of 5. I definitely say if it sounds intriguing to you, do not worry about the thickness and the scope of this book, and let yourself read it at a slow pace. You don't have to eat it up so fast. It is a relatively, like, I'd say slow to medium paced book, but it is so interesting and the characters are so fun. I read long books before that I thought should have been split into two. I think Lore by Alexandra Bracken is like this, that it might have done better for me as a duology. And there's other books that I've read that are a series I was like, this didn't need to be a series. You drew this out way too much. And I think writing this book as a standalone book was the perfect call for Samantha Shannon. I think that it feels like a perfectly self-contained story. I think if Samantha Shannon had split it, it wouldn't have the same expansive feel. It feels like you yourself are going on this adventure as you read because of the size of it, if that makes any sense. I had originally been thinking that Priory might be the end of my fantasy era, but I am still wanting to pick up fantasies. I thought that this book would be kind of the like, okay, I'm done with kind of the fantasy, that was a lot, and instead I'm going and probably picking up The Stolen Heir right away. I also started The Thousandth Floor, which is more of a sci-fi dystopian, but I am not burned out on fantasy yet, which is entirely what I expected to happen here. As a result, if you have fantasy recommendations, I'm always looking for some, so hit me up with your recs.